Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new installment of our department's research seminar. That's the Department for Theoretical Philosophy at the University of Bucharest. And the research seminar is organized jointly with CELFIS. That's the Center for Logic, Philosophy, and History of Science at the University of Bucharest, and ICUB. That's the Research Institute at the same university. And I should say that the speaker series is funded by UEFISCDI, that's the local public funding agency for research, via a postdoctoral grant whose project code is PN-3-P1-1.1-PD-2019-0535, and we're very grateful to our public sponsor. Tonight's speaker is a dear friend, and I'm delighted he agreed to talk to us about his ongoing research. We're talking about Mr. Micah Pimaro Thomas, Jr., and he's an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Calabar, Nigeria, and he's also pursuing a PhD in philosophy at the University of Bucharest. His talk tonight is titled Rethinking Time in African Philosophy. Micah, it's a pleasure to have you here, and please take it away. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Andre. I think what we'll basically do today is a journey back to Africa. So may I share my screen, please?
Yes, you have the possibility to do that, and thank you so much once again.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Not yet. We can now.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. This is a wonderful opportunity, and I thank you, Professor Andre, for organizing, and every other person who has been part of this. So today, the talk is Rethinking Time in African Philosophy. And then, yes, I'm an African, but I briefly said that when I came to Bucharest, I noticed that there are things we do in Africa that differs from what the Europeans do. I came back from Athens on a summer school last week, and then the professor was telling me when I insisted to help him pick up his phone that fell on the floor, that no, in Europe, we are independent. So I was flabbergasted because in Africa, where I come from, we live a communal life. So I was reflecting throughout the night till the next day. And I told him in Africa, where I come from, my child is a child of the whole community. And if my child misbehaves, anybody in the community has a right to discipline my child. So he was also flabbergasted because to him in Europe, that's a totally different and new idea. So today I want to take us back to Africa. I titled my talk Rethinking Time in African Philosophy, and I intend to achieve two things. First, to examine the basic concept of time in traditional African thought system, and possibly to infer implications for time transcendence in the space-time continuum, the African metaphysics of time. Now, first, I said, is there a separate metaphysics among Africans? If the Africans do have separate metaphysics, what separates it from other people's metaphysics? So this talk is about African metaphysics of time, and I will try to show that denying the existence of African metaphysics, maybe based on its primal, pre-literate, and non-documentary culture, does seem to be unfair to Africans because it doesn't significantly restrict the possibility of logical reasoning and reflectivity, of course, which is a hallmark of philosophical discourse. So the precision of African reasoning is best appreciated after a thorough examination of African thought patterns, which you will see differs from the Europeans or the Asian zone. So without resurrecting the already settled issues of the existence and non-existence of African philosophy, with their attendant polemics and argument, the term African philosophy simply presupposes and strongly implies the existence of clearly and uniquely African metaphysics, one that reflects the universe of experience and the African reality of existence. So throughout these discussions, I will demonstrate how this differs from Western metaphysics. This position, in addition to meeting the vehement criticisms and apathy of philosophers such as David Hume towards metaphysics and metaphysical issues in general, I hope will be rejected by universalist philosophers who argue that philosophical and metaphysical issues should have universal appeal without being regionalized. According to Humean criticism, the existence and non-existence of metaphysics has long been argued and established. So denying that reality is more than physical, sensible, and material is pulling the obvious and making a fundamental logical error. So on that note, I think it will continue to be true for as long as metaphysical is part of our nature. With several issues surrounding the concept of time in science or in physics, it is safe to say that modern physics doesn't have any special rules regarding the passage of time. Much progress, yes, I admit, has been made in understanding the nature of time, but the main question, what is time, I dare to say, is still unanswered, because scientists do not know whether time is simply a fourth dimension of the space-time continuum, or whether there's more to it. Anyway, this is a discourse for another day. Like Bogazi said, the dawn has arrived. Our primate ancestors awoke with a sense of deja vu when light illuminated his cave. Perhaps his newfound consciousness saw an implicit regularity in nature. The sun rises and sets again. In that epiphanous moment, man's unending quest to understand time began on that day, thousands of days ago. So in Africa, we do believe that the understanding of time is an ongoing process. We may die, and then the generation after us will continue to search for the full meaning of time. We haven't reached there yet. Now, what is time in African philosophy? I said, from the common knowledge of time being passing and non-stop, as shown by clocks and calendars, the passage of time is probably one of the simplest aspects of human perception, as it has always been associated with the passing of seasons and the cycles of celestial objects. But in this sense, our understanding of the flow of time started with understanding correlations between observable regular occurrence. This informs why in African philosophy, the concept of time has been researched from a number of perspectives, as it plays a pivotal role in the way a society drives its values, its beliefs, and conceptions such as on issues of death and afterlife. So in African philosophy, they say time is simply but a collection of events that have occurred, that are currently taking place, or will inevitably or immediately occur. Time is what is certain to occur, or what falls within the pattern of natural phenomena. Most importantly, as event evolves, so does time. But in African philosophy, time moves backward instead of forward. So I tried here to take us back to the ancient Egypt, then to the Southern Sudan, and the Yoruba tradition of Nigeria. Now, time was a creation of gods who made the moments, created hours, made the years, created the months, and gave birth to season. This act of creation comes at the beginning of the cosmic cycle, because the Egyptian used the words Jet and Nene to refer to the temporal aspect of reality as a whole. The paramount concern of the Egyptian then was of the goddess who was to preserve order and stability, which are especially threatened at the moment of temporal transition. The Egyptian had very little sense of history or even of past and future. So to them, the world was essentially static and unchanging, and the linear character of time scarcely seems to have exceeded the domain of individual existence. So the word Nene used by the Egyptian was associated with the sun god Re, and the emergence of a new day had connotations of the change. Then Jet was connected to the Osiris and the night, and implies that something has already been completed. Nene comes, or a boss, while Jet endures. Then Evans Pritchard was an anthropologist who, throughout his stay in the present southern Sudan, was able to explore the culture of the Nuer peoples. And he said the Nuer people's experience of time and space shows that people spoke of time in a very concrete fashion, driving it up in terms of seasonal cycles, especially the rainy and dry seasons. Because in Africa, we have two seasons, especially where I come from in Nigeria, we have only the rainy and the dry season. And same with the southern Sudan, wherever I preached that to his research. And we reference to social event on daily basis. So the Noah people have no word for time and could speak of it as something actual, something that passes and can be wasted, can be saved. The Noah people spoke of time as part of the day in terms of the tasks to be performed, like taking out cattle over a longer period, and they were hardly able to conceive of a past stretching back more than a few generations. Now, time among the Yoruba people of Nigeria is simply constituted by events, whether they have occurred, they are occurring, or yet to occur. Time is real only when experienced. Time devoid of events makes little sense. Time is not an objective phenomenon possessed by mechanical measurement devices or as mathematically given in clocks. Now we come to where I would like us to pay attention, because this is the nature of time in African philosophy. Prior to this time, there was no a systemized discourse on nature of time in African philosophy. I was discussing the Egyptian notion and the exploration of about Pritchard and the Yoruba because they were there. Basically, those three were sociological exploration, but this is the only philosophical work. And this person, John Mbiti, was regarded as the pioneer of the discourse on the nature of time in African philosophy. So he categorized time into three: the potential time, the actual time, and the no time. But the potential time simply is what is certain to occur, or what falls within the regularity of natural phenomena. And the potential time also refers to an inevitable time because it contains future events that are certain to occur or that falls within the inevitable regularity of nature. For example, the New Yam Festival or the age grade initiation. The New Yam Festival in most of African society is an inevitable event that will occur annually. That's the same with the age grade initiation. Then the actual time is what is present and past. So in African tradition, the present and the past are the same under the actual time because it moves backward rather than forward. And people set their mind not on future things, but chiefly on what has taken place. Then the no time refers to what has not taken place or what has no likelihood of immediate occurrence. The implication here is that the traditional African understanding of time does not deal with uncertainties. Now, what are the dimensions of time in African philosophy? I said there are two dimensions of time, the African system of thought, and both are totally different from the linear Western understanding of time, with an infinite past, present, and infinite future. So the understanding of time in African philosophy does not have infinite past and does not have infinite future. The future is virtually absent in the African system of thought because the events that lie within it have not taken place. They have not been realized and therefore cannot constitute time. Time to the African belief system must be experienced to become real. And only the past and the present have been experienced by anybody. No one has ever experienced the future. So future does not exist at all. Time has to be experienced in order to make sense or become real. The notion of future in African metaphysics of time covers a period of about 6 months or not beyond 2 years based on events and seen as an extension of the present, not a feature in itself. Indeed, he said this, and I quote, "The person experiences time partly in his individual life and partly through the history that goes back many generations before his own birth. Since what is in the future has not been experienced, it doesn't make sense. It cannot therefore constitute time and people do not know how to think about it, unless, of course, it is something which falls within the regularity of natural phenomena. Mbiti went further to discuss it in Swahili word of Sasa or Sasha. He said, originally the Sasa word comes from the spirit known by someone who is still alive. And then in the dimension of time, he uses Sasa to refer to the noun period, the period of immediate experience, the time region in which people are conscious of their existence having its own short future, dynamic present, and experience past. And then the Sasa is an existential time. It's also a micro time that is meaningful to the individual and the community simply because it is experienced. And most importantly, Sasa moved backward towards the Zamani rather than forward. Now, Zamani also has spirit originally, not known by anyone currently alive, but in the dimension of time, Mbiti used Zamani as a micro time which overlaps Sasa in its immediate past. So he says Zamani refers to events which have been realized and experienced. It is the graveyard of time, or the ocean of time. It is the deposit of events which are no longer available to human experiences. Now, to the second part of my talk, I try to draw implication on the notion or the conception of time in African philosophy. And the first implication is on time transcendence. So I said, just like every other human being, Africans do long for eternity to work beyond our experiences, which is, of course, in time. So in Sasa, just like I have said earlier, which swallows of the linear concepts of time, we could have a distant future, I think, because Sasa as a micro time or existential time is meaningful to the individual or community only through their participation or experience. So I want us to look at participation and experience, devoid of semantic analysis. So, and I said, assuming a certain African community decide to take a climate action because of the existential realities of global warming by unanimously agreeing that every member of that community should become vegan, respect and protect the forest and all green spaces, or invest their money responsibly and cut consumption and waste, knowing fully that Africa is and will be most vulnerable in the climate change crisis. Would such steps only be beneficial for those who are alive now, or the next generation beyond the limit of 2 years? Assuming those that would exist thereafter will benefit from such prudential acts, can we say the actors, of course, those of us who are alive, participated and experienced in bettering the lives of people that will come after, let's say in the future? Can we now say they have experienced and participated in a future event? Because time for Africans must be experienced. And I took it to mean that the general notion of time transcendence refers to an individual capacity to cross the limit of earthly life to mental travel into eternity. This work attempts to extend the concrete, substantive, and epochal African focus on time by realizing that there is possibility of existing beyond this concept of time. I think we can exist beyond the two notions of time in African philosophy. And then the second implication is on the space-time continuum. So this informs us why Africans are so much tied to their ancestral homes or land. Also, that the notion of banishment or ostracization from the community is seen as the greatest misfortune that can befall any member of the community or society, shows that the forest or the evil forest where a perpetrator of evil deed is sent to is devoid of events. Because in African philosophy, when you commit a crime, you are sent out from the community to an evil forest. And the belief is that in that evil forest exists no event. because the Africans believe that their land provides them with the roots of existence as well as binding them mystically to their departed. So space, just like time, are not abstract, but concrete environment where it can take place. So finally, I said time, as shown here, differs from that of the West, and time is subjective and dependent on human experiences, and also a vital source that animates all forms of life and maintains balances as experienced in all pervading reality. The implication I've drawn, I hope, will be able to generate further conversations on discourse on African metaphysics of time. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Micah, and thank you for that wonderful talk. With everyone's permission, let's start the Q&A. I wonder if anyone has a first question. Let me maybe break the ice by asking you something about what you said right at the end. You gave this example of someone who's trespassing, who's violating some local regulations, perhaps the local moral code, and who's sent to a forest, right, where there's time, but nothing happens. There's no event, right? And so I had it seemed to me this was suggested in some of the earlier things you said as well, but I think it stands out in this metaphorical way of looking at things. It seems as though there's a kind of intermingling between metaphysics on the one hand and ethics or value theory on the other hand, right? It's a punishment for someone to be sent to the time with no events, right? It's they stand to be corrected by going through this period of event loss, as it were, to regain their capacity to live through ordinary events. So is it something like that, or would that be a fair account? And so the more general question is, how do value theory and metaphysics relate when it comes to time and experiencing time? Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Should I go ahead or wait for another question?
I think it might be best to sort of take them one at a time.
Okay. So I think it also has to do with the moral code, but that's actually not my main concern in this talk. In African tradition or African traditional thought system, which we believe now is adulterated because of the Christian religion and the Islam in African land, but it's still ongoing even till tomorrow in some parts of Africa. So when a person commits an offense, the person is taken to either the district head or the person is taken to a sitting of the elders where they decide the fate of the person. And once the offense is the capital offense, in African society, we don't encourage maybe death by hanging or whatever. The best thing to do is for the person to be banished from the community because they believe that there is no life outside the community. And once you're taken outside to the community, in African societies, we have forests all around. So when the person is wrong, he's taken to the forest, and the forest is tagged as evil forest. In the evil forest, no event takes place because time is only relevant when it's correlated with events. So since there are no events in the forest, life will make no meaning to such a person. They send you as a punishment, and then with no intention of getting you back to the society. It's like sending you to a journey that you will never return. So it's a sort of punishment, but I brought that in the talk because I wanted to show that time is only relevant when it is associated with events, since it is actually not a talk on ethics. I don't know if I was able to answer you.
Yeah, I think that was quite illuminating. I suppose now I want to refine a bit something I was asking. So in mentioning the idea that time has to do with events for members of the community, and that somebody who's a transgressor is banished from the community and is sent to the land where time has no events in it. So what about the in-betweens? What about punishment that fails to be capital in this sense of entirely alienating the person in question from society? It seems as though there is an experience of time. They're sent, which events they can partake in changes and perhaps is impoverished, but then they can return within the community, right? And so is that something that's been discussed under the heading of how time relates to events, or?
Yeah, I think it's something that's been discussed as how time relates to events. Believing that when you go there on your own, devoid of community, time doesn't exist. It may exist, but just like Berkeley would say, that maybe in the mind of God. But for the members of the community, time doesn't exist where the person is sent completely.
Good, thanks so much. And plenty of more questions, but in case there are other questions, I can yield and take my time. So there are some other questions, please don't hesitate.
I had I was noticing while you guys were talking about the punishment through time, that it actually shows a very similar image to our own type of punishment, you know, to the Western.
Okay.
And I just had this thought, and so we see it in a very similar way. We the talk started out, Micah started out by saying that about the differences, but I think this illuminates on something that is very similar between how we see time. Micah, what do you think?
Okay, I don't think I got you right. I was trying to check
Okay,
what Vanessa said. Just a moment. Could you repeat it, please?
In Western cultures, we punish people by putting them in prison.
Okay.
And there is even the saying that they are doing time. And prison is a place where you cannot have experiences. Do you think that this is similar?
Okay, I think it's really not similar, because in the prison you meet other people.
Okay.
Yes,
okay,
but
so
in the African society, when you're sent to an evil forest, you're banished completely to where event occurs. And in an evil forest, you exist only with the spirits.
and I also wanted to ask about planning. Is there any kind of planning of activities?
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay, go ahead, please.
No, that's it. Is there any
Okay,
kind of
yes.
planning? Yes.
Yes. In African society, where I mentioned that future connotes 6 months and not beyond 2 years, It refers to events under the dimension of time. It refers to events that would inevitably take place. Events like the New Yam Festival, wherever you are in Africa now, you know that basically between September and October, we will have a New Yam Festival. So come what may, we will still have a New Yam Festival next year. But for instance, if I say I want to get married in the future, that is not time in African metaphysics of time, because the fact that I will get married is not inevitable. Something may happen. I may die before I get married, and then I may change my mind not to get married again. So it has to do with planning, but on events that are regularly occurring in nature.
Okay, I understand, and it is very, very, very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The talk was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for the question and for the answer.
Yeah,
Yes.
may I briefly say something to what Vanessa said? She said, would you call African time cyclical since it is not linear? Yes, the answer is yes. Time in African metaphysics is not linear at all.
I think that's a very nice rejoinder. And then would you say that that's a distinction that sort of separates African philosophy from European traditions that a lot of folks are more familiar with? Or would you rather say that these two ways of conceiving of time in a cyclical fashion and in a linear one, respectively, sort of crosscut, I apologize, these traditions, so that, for instance, in accounts of religious time, for instance, in Micah Eliade, there is a rich discussion of cyclical time. And I wonder if that relates to some of the things you mentioned at the start of your talk.
Okay, so I think one thing we should understand is, just like I earlier said, the conception of time differs with the Western because we do not have infinite past, and we do not have infinite future. And where I discuss the notion of the dimension of time, you could see that the present and the future are merged together. And there's something in Beatty said, which is almost similar to Heidegger's notion of design, a being to death. So in Africa, whereas we in the Western world, every belief is thought to be progressing forward, in African notion, we think that it's backward. We move backward towards death. So we don't progress. And that brings us to an issue of what is mostly known in the media now as African time. There's what is called African time. It's actually not a philosophical notion, but it simply means that an African attitude towards time is lackadaisical. When you give an African appointment for 10 o'clock, he may come 12 o'clock. So when you hear of African time, it's different from the notion of time in African philosophy. So if we said we shouldn't call our own pattern of reasoning as African, you could see from what I have explained now that there are so many different things that we hold so sacred to us that it's not found in the Western philosophy. It's not found in the German idealism. It's not found in the European philosophy. Because we believe that our experiences, our belief systems, our cultures, our tradition, the issues of the ancestors, which is very paramount in African philosophy. We believe that as a being unto death, when you go, everyone who dies becomes a living dead, because such person is referred and regarded as the same person who died. And we also believe that within that period, the person remains as an ancestor to look over the community, the activities, the events that still happens in that community. I don't know if I'm able to say something you wanted to hear.
Oh, this is a great answer. Thank you so much, Micah. And I think it really puts into perspective that initially I had thought that maybe a key point in your presentation was going to concern the relationship between events that are in time and time itself. But now that you've mentioned Heidegger, it now seems to me that it really pertains to the experience of the flow of time, to the experience of undergoing the events that are in time. And relatedly, of course, since you've mentioned Heidegger, the experience of someone who knows that there are beings whose span of life is limited and sometimes short. And so that, in some sense, is a backdrop to every experience of the passing of time that they have. So, with that in mind, let me ask you another brief question, and I promise I'll stop after
No,
this.
it's okay.
So it sometimes, you know, in the analytic metaphysics of time, there's this distinction that's drawn between the unfolding of the events in time and the instants or time intervals themselves, during which or throughout which these events unfold. And so I wonder if that's a distinction that you find in African philosophy, and if you find that that's in any way sort of bridge between the two endeavors, or if you think that that would, in some sense, mystify or misconstrue the approach coming from African philosophy of time that you've just sketched. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think from the implications drawn from my talk, I have not seen a work on time transcendence in African philosophy. So I tried to draw that implication for the first time. And then, since this is an ongoing work, I must admit, I would have to look into that, because I put down something when I was trying to compile this work on the time travel in African philosophy, because it's basically dependent on the cosmos, which is this ultimate source of light and justice in African philosophy. So I must admit here, I may not be able to give you a concise answer to that, but maybe in the next series, if I'm able, I'll come up with something in regard to that.
That's a wonderful answer, and thank you so much for saying that. And please trust, we're very much looking forward and to a new installment, to a new talk that you might give. And thank you once again so much for this talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, Micah. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful afternoon, and let us spend our time in ways that are becoming fruitful and wise. Thanks. Have a good night.
Thank you.